Hey, Stacey David here with Tales of a Gearhead podcast. This podcast is about all things automotive from any time, any place, and beyond. All right, let's get to it. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is probably the main issue that people run into when they take on a project. And it doesn't matter if you're a total beginner or if you're a pro and been doing it for 20 years. This is always something that you have to look at and you have to be very honest about, and that is time. The time it's going to take to do it. And, I get that question all the time. People are like, well, it takes me a long time, or it takes me longer than I thought it would, or my wife's on my back because this project's been sitting for years, or they ask us, it's like, hey, when are you going to finish a project? That kind of stuff. It's like time is the key on all of this. And this is where I really have an issue with most of the reality type shows. Is they make it look like this is easy and that this is quick and you can do it in a week or one show or whatever. That is not realistic. And you need to just wipe that out of your head, because you will drive yourself crazy with that, because naturally you get into it. You can't do it that quick. Then you get frustrated. Then you think you're supposed to. And then you think you should be able to do it that quickly. And people end up just walking away from it because it's frustrating. And that's not what we want. We want you to keep working on stuff. And we want you to be encouraged in the journey, because it is a journey. So let's just talk about this a little bit realistically on a timeline. Say you pick up a project. We've talked a lot about the levels of restoration. I've got the book coming out about that, where we have level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, and level 5. And I'm going to address that a little bit, but the timeline, works with any of that. So you're an average person. Say you have a job and you work 40 hours a week. So say it's a 9 to 5. Okay, so you come home at 5 o'clock, you relax for an hour and just unwind a little bit. Okay, then you eat dinner. That's another hour. Okay, and then hopefully you have a wife or kids or a dog, and you spend a little bit of time watching TV or doing something. So realistically, you might spend a couple hours at the end of the day working on your project. Maybe. But let's just give you that. Okay, so 2 hours, and then times 5 days, so that's Monday through Friday. You come home and you dedicate yourself to spending 2 hours on your project. That's 10 hours. All right, let's talk about the weekend. If you spend 5 hours on Saturday and Sunday each, that's a lot. That's the majority of the day. But let's say you do that. That's 10 hours as well. So we're looking at maybe 20 hours a week that you're spending on your vehicle. Now, you're looking at that going, yeah, man, I'll easily do that. No, you won't. You think you will, but keep in mind, are you really going to spend most of your Saturdays and Sundays every Saturday and Sunday? You're not going to go to a football game. You're not going to go to a movie. You're not going to go hang out at the lake. You're not going to do anything like that. Okay, you might not, but most people will. So even if, you spend 20 hours a week, and then you say, you multiply that by 52 weeks in a year. No, because a lot of those weeks are holidays and other things, that come up. So let's slice 10 of those off. Let's say you're 42 weeks a year times 20. That's 840 hours. That's probably the very top amount of hours you're going to be able to put in a vehicle per year. Now, you think, wow, that's a lot. That's great. I can get it done in that. That's also pretty unrealistic numbers-wise. I have found with a person that's not a professional builder, I'm talking spare time builder, an enthusiast, you kind of need to cut that in half. You're looking at about 420 hours in 1 year, and still keeping any kind of a real life and any kind of friendship and any kind of, social life at all. Okay, now 420 hours a year, if you're doing like a level 1 project, and of course level 1 is get it running and driving safely. That's not just starting the engine in the garage and standing over the gas can over the top of it. That's not get it running and driving. When I say get it running and driving, you can drive it down the road and take it to the grocery store and safely, and you don't get tickets and the brakes work and the wiring doesn't explode on you and all that stuff. So generally a level 1 takes up to 200 hours, depending on what you're doing to it. It could be a lot less than that, but that's kind of the ballpark. Okay, so a level 2, which is a cosmetic and mechanical restoration, which could be paint job, interior, all that other stuff, well, that can jump up to 800 hours depending on what you're going to do with it. So see, you're already into 2 years if you're doing 400 hours a year of your spare time. You see how quickly that jumps up? And that's why it's important for people to look at this and go, oh my gosh, maybe I don't need that really nice paint job. Maybe I do just want to get it running. Maybe I don't want to do a real extensive restoration on it. Now, when you start getting into level 3s, which are resto mods, where you're doing complete drivetrain swaps, you level 4s, which are frame offs, and level 5s, which are full customs, oh my gosh, the hours skyrocket at that point, thousands of hours. And so you can see this easily can turn into, a 10-year project, that you never planned on. Okay, so then you go, well, okay, I'll take it to a shop and have them do it. Well, you got the hours right there in front of you. Add those up. 420 hours a year, that's $42,000 in labor at $100 an hour to a shop, which is about average, what somebody would charge. So that's a big chunk that you're saving doing it yourself. So you see why it's important to kind of look at this. In looking at these numbers, nobody wants to look at these because it's like, oh man, you're killing my dream. No, we're saving you from a nightmare, man. You got to approach this right. And if you do, it'll be a great project. And obviously there's ways to speed it up. You can do things with friends. You can jump into a project and go, okay, I'm going to get it running and driving, but then I'm going to go to a shop and have them do the paint job. Or I'm going to go to a place and have them do the upholstery. Or I'll have somebody build the engine. And yeah, you can farm out these things and save yourself some time and money. But that's the biggest thing that I want people to look at is that's why it takes time to build these things. And the good part is we have an aftermarket that keeps putting out products that makes this easier and easier and easier. So, for example, not too long ago, if you wanted to change the suspension on your project, you had to go to a junkyard, find a different suspension, cut it out, graft it onto your vehicle, and, build it that way. Well, now there's aftermarket stuff that you can buy that first it was bolt-on, now it's weld-on. Now you can buy a complete chassis, that you can do. And boy, it's a huge time saver, but, it does cost. So time and money dance around each other. The more time you spend, the less money you put into it, but time is money. So, that's what you need to keep in mind before you take on a project. And the reason I say this is that now, armed with this kind of numbers, with this kind of thinking, when you're at the Make-em auction or you're at somebody's, estate sale, or you're looking at some vehicle on eBay or whatever, or at a used car lot, you can start doing the math real quick, going, okay, that's a really cool vehicle. I'd like to drop a V8 in that, and put air conditioning and lower it and drop it. And every one of those things you're saying, you should be able to go, okay, that's going to cost that, bam. And now you're at about a $60,000 build over 2 years, 3 years' time. And that will deter you really quick from making a mistake and getting into a project that you can't handle and that you don't have the time, you don't have the resources to do. And it's hard to walk away from those because we have watched so many shows now like American Pickers and all this stuff, all these buy and sell shows, these car shows, and people finding the cobras in the barn and all that kind of stuff. They've permeated our industry with a mentality that there's like buried treasure out there. And so we've all become kind of treasure hunters. And that's not a car person. You got to change your thinking. You might find something that you can make some money off of if you turn and sell it, but that's the rarity. That's not the main thing. If that becomes your focus, then you've just become a used car salesman. And that's fine if that's what you want to do. But these numbers here, somebody's got to build that vehicle. Somebody's got to restore that. Mark, our main shooter, just came in the other day, and he showed me a project, and it's a 64 Aston Martin DB4. Oh my gosh, it's like one of my favorite cars. And it needs a complete restoration. This thing has sat in somebody's barn. It was disassembled. Somebody was doing a 100-point restoration on it. So now it's in a zillion pieces, and it needs a complete build. Now, to do that car right, and don't think for a second that I wasn't tempted, that I'm not. I have to keep away from that because I want that car. But I also know you don't just throw that car together in any way. You do not modify it. You do not put a Hemi in it or whatever. As much as I'd love to do that, that car, that's $1 million car restored properly. And so that is, I have to look at that and go, okay, do I want to spend the incredible amount of money it's going to take to have that motor done by an Aston Martin expert and all this and do this concours-style restoration that's going to take X amount of years for whatever payoff is at the end, And so looking at that realistically, that's not a car for me. I'm not interested in doing that car. And so I can easily walk away from it. Now, if the car was wrecked or rusty and not all there, well, now I'd look at that as a total resto mod kind of thing. And maybe get a modern Aston Martin engine and do, flare it, do some sort of cool thing to it. And that becomes a whole different animal that it would be worth doing that, but not in the shape that it was in. So hopefully this gives you some ideas and some groundwork and a mindset as you approach these projects. And listen, if you're into a project and it's taken a long time, don't get discouraged, man. It's supposed to take time. That's why you got it. You spend time working on it. Just make sure you're spending the right time on it and you're doing those things that every time you work on it, you have a little bit of a victory. In other words, you go out there and you put in a wiring harness and you're done. Finish something. And that gives you that little bit of encouragement. It's like, it's one more step done. And you'll get it done. You'll get it knocked out. All right, this question comes from Craig, and Craig has a 2000 Trans Am. He bought a ram air hood for it, took it to his mechanic, and the mechanic says there's no way that this is the right hood and the right kit to make this functional. What Craig is trying to do is make his ram air hood functional. So the question to me, he says, hey, Stacey, can you possibly tell me if this is the correct conversion kit for my TA? If not, I can send it back and receive the correct one. Craig, I wish I could tell you just by osmosis that is the right kit or not, but there's no way for me to know. I'll tell you what, all you can do, first of all, if you trust your mechanic and his mechanical ability, if he has shown you why it won't fit, then it won't fit. So evidently they have sent you the wrong part. And it's very easy. I see the company you got it from is Suncoast. That's a good company. You can send it back to them and you can get the right part, provided you haven't modified it. Now, if your mechanic went in there and he says, hey, I'm just going to file this piece right here or cut this, the second you modify, especially a body panel, but anytime you buy an aftermarket part, if you modify it, if you grind on it, if you do anything like that, if you buy a set of wheels and you mount tires on them, she's all over. You cannot return them. They will not take them back because you've damaged them. You've put marks on them. You've done something on them. So if you have done that or your mechanic has done that, no, you won't be able to return it unless you talk to them and just say, hey, I tried to make this fit and what can you do? A lot of companies, especially if they sent you the wrong part. Now, if they sent you the right part and maybe the box was mismarked, part number was wrong, that's kind of on them. So they will hopefully go, we sent you the wrong part. We'll make it right. That's what most companies will do. So you got some options here. Those ram air hoods, they're out there. This is not a difficult thing that you're trying to do here. So this should be pretty much as close to a bolt-on kind of deal as you can get. So if your mechanic is saying it's not right, I would trust my mechanic and I would go back to the company and get the right part. That brings up a question here, though, that I wanted to address, and that is, what do you do when things don't fit? Now, we just addressed the situation with Craig, and that's an aftermarket part, a hood. If you're putting on a set of brakes from Bayer or some sort of suspension kit from Skyjacker or Fabtech or whatever, and something's not working, that's a very easy thing. You send back the parts and you get the right parts. What if it's your alternator or your starter? For those of you out there that are not doing a full build, maybe you're just trying to keep your old Chevelle running. Maybe you're just trying to keep your old Jeep running from the 80s. Maybe you have a CJ7. Maybe you have an old pickup. Maybe you have a square-body Chevy truck, and you're not doing a full build on it. So you go down, and here's the scenario. You go down to AutoZone or O'Reilly or Advance, one of the local auto parts stores, and you get a new starter or a water pump or a fuel pump or the power steering pump, one of those accessories, and you take it back and it doesn't fit. Or the hookups are wrong. If it's an alternator, the wiring's different. And you're like, well, what just happened? Well, here's how this happens. Through the years, the manufacturers have made changes to water pumps and starters. They're subtle changes, and a lot of times they don't matter. But on some vehicles, it does. Sometimes you need that really tight clearance. Sometimes you need that reduced shaft that comes out of there. And when you took your old part in and traded it, it will go out to the rebuilder, and they will use that as a core, and they will rebuild it. Sitting in a box somewhere on a shelf is exactly the part you need, probably. So what you need to do is take that new part back to the store you got it from and say, this doesn't fit. Do you have another one? And chances are they'll bring out another box, and you start lining them up. I've done this many times. And you'll line up a starter, and all of a sudden, there'll be the one. It looks just like the one that you traded in. Now, that brings up another thing. After you've done this long enough, you will do this every time. When a guy comes to the counter with the new part in a box at an O'Reilly's or Napa or whatever auto parts store, open the box and compare it to your original part. And I mean compare it. Look at the relation of the bolt holes. Look at the size of the housing. Look at the flanges. Look at everything on there. And if there's any difference whatsoever, you need to make note of it. Or don't give him your old one yet. Take the new one over and fit it, and then bring your old one back for trade-in. And that way you'll be able to make sure it's going to fit. Now, let's talk about worst-case scenario. What if you can't get one to fit? Here's an example. I was working on a World War II vehicle, an M29 Weasel. Okay, this is a tracked vehicle about the size of a Jeep, and they used them in World War II. Even though it was a straight-six Studebaker engine, there was a lot of special parts that were on the military vehicle. The distributor came up, and then instead of just coming straight out, it made a right angle so it didn't go into the driver's ribs. Well, that was specific to the Weasel. Starter was the same way. So I took my starter out and took it down to the auto parts store, and they just scratched their heads. They went through all of their Studebaker books and couldn't find anything that was even close. So I ended up taking it down to a place that specialized in rebuilding starters. And I went to the guy, and he took one look at that, and he says, "What is this off of?" He said, "This come off of Noah's Ark? What the heck?" And I said, "Well, you're close. It's just about." And he was able to rebuild it. And, it cost me a little more, but he rebuilt my original starter. I put it in, no problems. So if you have a very specific part, you can buy the rebuild kit for a water pump or a lot of these, and you can rebuild them yourself if you want to. Or you can go to a mechanic that will actually do that. There's a lot of guys that will do that. They'll rebuild your parts for you, knowing that this can be an issue. And I'm not talking about if you're trying to restore a vehicle and keep it all original, that's a whole nother deal. I mean, if you're trying to keep the original parts on there that have the part number, date coded just right, then absolutely, you don't let that out of your sight. You make sure that piece is rebuilt and comes back to you. But if you're not doing that, this is just making sure you get things to fit. Now, what if you can't find one that's available? What if it's just not available? I just ran into this. I'm working on a 67 Jeepster. It has the old 225 V6 Buick engine in it. And the fuel pump, somebody had tried to put another fuel pump on it, and the fuel pump housing was too big, and it hit the motor mount. So it was on crooked. They couldn't figure it out. They just put an electric fuel pump on it. Well, I didn't want to do that. So I got in there and I immediately found out, okay, here was the problem. They couldn't get the fuel pump to bolt on because obviously back in the day, the original fuel pump was smaller. Okay, so I went through a couple of fuel pumps. That little one's no longer in existence. So now what are you going to do? Well, I either will have to go to an electric fuel pump or I'll have to make the mechanical fuel pump fit. So I took out a grinder and I did a little clearancing on the motor mount bracket, and now it fits. Simple thing. Fortunately, it was just right there. It wasn't against the block or something like that. But that's what happens when you're working on these cars like this. Sometimes you have to solve the problem. And sometimes there is no solution in getting a different part. Because there's a lot of people that get upset and go to the auto parts stores and they pitch a fit, and this doesn't fit and that doesn't work, and they don't have the solution. That's where it falls on you as the restorer, as the builder, to make it fit. And you'll run into this mostly with OEM type stuff. Now, if you're dealing with aftermarket products, blowers, superchargers, intake manifolds, valve covers, those kind of things, those should fit. And if they don't, before you start cutting on them, unless it's some minor thing, I would get back in touch with the manufacturer, just like we told Craig to do, and get the part back, get the right part, and everything should be fine. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of what kind of stuff you're going to face. I know for a fact that every one of you listening to me right now has been through that. You went down, you got a replacement water pump or starter or something, and then you spent the next hour going, why doesn't this fit? Why are the hookups in the wrong place? And that's why. They've just given you the wrong housing. So just keep at it. Solve the problem. That's what this is all about. All right, that's our show for today, which means you need to get out there and start working on something. Spend some time turning wrenches. You'll love it. Also, make sure to check out our website, staceydavid.com. We got all kinds of new products, some great stuff there you're going to love. Also, make sure you check out our social media. That's Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, all at Official Stacey David. Our social media is where you're going to find all the bonus content, the giveaways, the contests, the trivia. We even have extra viewer projects that we show everybody to focus on what you're working on. YouTube is where you're going to be able to find all of our episodes of Gears, past, present, and future. I know a lot of you guys ask about that. That's where you can see them. All right, that's all we got. We'll see you next time.